friend of the president, he invited the president to spend the afternoon there looking at a game preserve and having lunch. And when they pulled the boat up, the president was in his wheelchair, and the president was how to get him onto the St. Joseph shoreline. And there was a large cattle chute. Mr. Richardson ran cattle. And they came up with the idea that they would lift him up on a sling and they would roll him down the cattle chute. And Mr. Roosevelt was looking at that. I have this as quotations. He said, Sid, do you plan to roll me down this cattle chute? And Sid Richardson felt very quickly on his feet and said, Mr. President, you are the biggest bull that will ever come down that cattle chute. So, but that was the one place he did go ashore, St. Joseph for that afternoon.
Well, who was, when the island was privately owned, has it always been privately owned through land grants, and the town was, the people were leased land, or were they squatters and then someone came and bought the land, or?
As Guthrie said, William Little, St. Joe or?
Yeah, St. Joseph.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was kind of where, I think at that time, when they would live there, it belonged to the state of Texas, or did it belong to,
In 1845 is when a coastal historian named Keith Guthrie, no relation, claims that the population of St. Joe began building in 1845. At that point, I believe it was owned by the Little Consortium. And it went into various stages of ownership, although it's rather unclear. 1876, very important date. I think a new owner there, Mr. Richardson, the person that I just described, bought the island in 1923, and it has remained in his family ever since. It is still held by, it's no longer the Richardsons, it's now the Bass, very Bass family. And Very Bass was Mr. Richardson's grand nephew. Mr. Richardson had no children, and he left the island too. So that's still under private ownership.
So they had always leased their homes and property, the island people over there? Just kind of squatted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Until
they
somebody
were
tells you
there, they were
different.
told they had to leave.
Right. Yeah.
And out and go. In Port Aransas, when her father came, no, Jed brother came here, her father's father, he bought a tract of land, and they would be blocks. From like Station Street to kind of what is now Oleander. And that's why we find, since I do title work and abstract, you'll have the Brundrick survey, you'll have the Oaks survey, the White survey, the Robert survey. That was the original town, and that's where they got their names, from the families and those blocks were named after them. And then so that meant that the island stopped pretty much at Robert Street. And I can kind of remember, I was born in the 50s. But people had fences around their house because there was no roads really, but there was cattle trails.
Oh, to keep the cattle out of the
Yeah,
yards.
and then Alistair Street was kind of a dirt road, and our street was a dirt road. I remember that when they finally, they put shell on it.
Yeah, there'd be none of it.
And then they finally paved it in the 60s and whatnot. But then Gail Gordon Munsell, who was of the Gordon family in the East, the Gordon Milk family,
Oh.
he was quite a playboy and sportsman. Here in the 30s, there were not many women. Mostly they were tending bar or servicing. It was a big, it was big game. That was, fishing.
Yeah.
Deep sea fishing was the deal. And then, when families started moving in, but they built the Catholic church, because Catholics have to go to church, be they, man or female, so they had a Catholic church. Okay. When they built the Presbyterian church, a lot of men just what is now G. And he was, like I say, a playboy, and I think his family was like, but he married one of the local beauties from Corpus Christi, and her name was Billy Peebles. And
William Walter Peebles.
but
Her daddy wanted a son. So she became known as Billy.
Billy, but she was a beauty contestant with her, and she had a really pretty sister, Literary. But anyhow, she and Gail Gordon, they dated for like 7 years. Because I think she was young and he was rather older than her, and I think he had a little bit. But they were married 6 months and he died. And so Billy was left with all this money. And her sister was married to Lynn Walker, whose good partner and friend was Teddy Matthews. But Munsell had started, we had a kind of water wells and stuff down where, kind of where the Studmans, on that side of there. And he, so it was telephone, the ice house. The ice house was a big deal. That's where the telephone company is now. And finally the electricity. He had done all that almost between the periods of, I wish Pat McNamara was here, between the periods of 1918 and 1923 is when he died. So anyhow, Billy, being the good-looking now rich widow, she was very much in demand. Oh, yeah. And so there was a lot of, especially these fishermen, these from San Antonio, mostly San Antonio, but it come down. She was very sought after, and she ended up marrying an attorney. His name was Pat McNamara. No, Tom McNamara. And anyhow, he started subdividing all of it, called it a Rancis Company Holding C. And so a lot of people now own property, which is kind of between Roberts and G, is a lot of that's a Rancis Holding Company. And they had 2 sons, Pat and Tom. Tom was the oldest, Tom's died. And Pat is the one, and I think he sold most of his properties now, but they would be the properties that came, a lot of the commercial part. And that's kind of how it developed.
Nancy, you mentioned electricity on the island. And right now, you and I throw a switch, and electricity that drives our televisions and our light comes from Oso Lake in Corpus Christi, Texas. There is a power plant. But Mr. Matthews, that wasn't always the case on this island. Now we generate electricity. Would you tell us a little bit about how we got electricity before there was the Oso plant?
Well, there was a power plant just about a half block over this direction, and it had 2 great big old diesel engines in it. One of them was a 2-cylinder, one of them was a 3-cylinder. And when they were running, you knew they were going. And you hear them shut one down, and the lights would blink, and they start up the other, and do service on it. But my folks, our folks got married in October of 1929, and there was no electricity being generated here in Olive at that time. It was shortly after they got married that they got their first electric lights. So that gives you some idea of how long that's been going on.
You were saying that they weren't generating any electricity. Was there no electricity coming here at all before that?
No electricity.
Just no electricity at all before
None that I
19.
know
What
of.
were you saying?
1929.
Before 29.
Before 29.
And the big hot spot was.
They were married in October of 29, and it could be that it didn't start up until 1930.
Okay, right around it.
But it was quite a deal. My mother loved it. She was an old Kansas girl. Got down here. She came down to babysit some kids for a car dealer that moved down the coast to really get into Utopia. And they stayed just long enough for her to meet my dad. So when they left, she stayed. She worked in a restaurant down on the waterfront, about where Shorty's place is right now. And there no bulkhead or anything like that. When the tide came up, she took her shoes off and waited to work. When the tide went down, she said she could leave her shoes on and wade back up to the road in front of the hotel and walk on home. But that's the way the amenities were at that time.
Well, the hot spot, I think also too for a lot of people was, that was kind of the center of industry. Because the other hot spot that people met in, that was the place to go at 5 o'clock was the ice house. Because there wasn't refrigeration, a lot of people kept their eggs or their milk or whatever there. Mary Jo's father kept her fish. They had to be on ice until they got, the fish were kept there.
Dad kept his deer.
Yeah, kept it there. And actually, what was the wall game dinner kind of came out of that because at the end of the year, you know, you kept things on ice. So at the end of the year, before you started fishing, getting the fresh stuff in, everybody would take their stuff out of the ice house, cook it up, and have a big party.
Yep.
And that was how the fish and game dinner came to be.
But I do remember sailfish and tarpon lying in that one unit towards the east. There were 2 units in there. One was for pretty much everything, and the other unit was for special.
And Manny, do you remember what your telephone number was?
3-5.
Ours was 16.
16.
My aunt has a telephone. Well, and so was her aunt and mother's telephone company was down there too.
And I worked there.
I guess Aunt Gladys before that.
My aunt taught me to work that telephone board when I was 9 years old. And I could work as a relief operator for an hour or so.
But I,
Did you do that?
Yeah,
Did you ever listen to a conversation? Did you ever listen in on a conversation?
no.
Not one? Good Catholic girl, I'd leave her with you.
oh, okay. Well, her Aunt Gladys worked down there.
Yes, she did, and I worked with Gladys.
And, you know, you'd pick up the phone and say, I'd be at 4 or 5 years old, Aunt Gladys, I want to talk to Mary Jo. But Aunt Gladys knew who's singing who. We know. Yeah. And of course, well, anyhow.
Along those lines, during World War II, my aunt, who was called the chief operator and ran the telephone show, overheard a foreign message between a carpenter, a German spy, and somebody else that he was talking to, and so she reported it to the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard came down and took care of the matter, and then they chewed her out for listening to the private conversation.
Well, that's how my father got here, is he and his mother were living in Corpus Christi, and at either 12 or 14 years old, he started working for Western Union. And one of his daily trips, which was quite a trip back then, was to come over to the war pilot station and give them Western Union messages as to what boats were coming in and what were going out. And he, you know, they thought so much of him, because he had gone to 12th grade, he had 12th grade education. They wanted him to be their secretary, administrator. And so he started working, he came over here in 1924, which is when Grandma came also, and she was postmaster for many years, for about 24 to maybe, she was still postmaster when I was a kid. But he had flat feet to go to the war. But because of his position, he worked for the Treasury Department, which was in conjunction with the Coast Guard, to report, you know, the comings and goings, and there was a U-boat that was spotted in the channel.
And he was one of the sweetest men on this island, because I worked on this switchboard and caught all kinds of hell from Woody Allen and some others.
We're not making names, but we're not making.
But we only had so many plugs, and the little numbers would drop down, and when you ran out of plugs, you had to sit there until you had one you could use. And Smitty never got mad, and he had to use the telephone more than anybody else. And he just never got mad at us.
And the difference between Smitty and Ann Oprah was he was authorized to pay attention. She just took it upon herself.
Civic duty.
I can say something about the very earliest water system, but whenever Sarah Ann and William Redmond lived where the hill is, where the taxidermy shop, where it's called Cedar Hill, they had a house there, and Jed Rendrick lived down, I guess, in the area on where Rendrick Avenue is, West Rendrick Avenue. Anyway, my grandfather Jed they had a windmill up there on their property on the hill, and so he ran a pipe down to his land to have water. And apparently, people didn't have a lot of easily fresh water anyway, so I guess what they're fresh is kind of salty and brackish coming out. But anyway, he let them get water from his, so it was supposed to be for a fee, but apparently back then people really didn't pay for their stuff. I guess water was traded. Anyway, so that was, I guess, one of the earliest water systems.
Well, you know, it's when people who like,
That was
Menzel,
early 90s.
people who came here who were not quite the same kind of spirit of maybe our families, but they came from a larger place. They wanted some creature comforts, or at least they understood that a town needed certain things. And it was back in the 60s, George Hahn bought property here. George Hahn organized the water board. And one of the first things that happened, because we turned on the faucet, that was where we got our water. It was brackish, briny, you cooked with it, you boiled it, and you drank it. And it was not a happy sight. And I was small, and I knew I didn't like it. But they were dredging out what is now the marina. They dredged that out, and they put a big water, it was like a big
Big sister or something.
it was a big tank, and once a week, twice a week, they would bring the water, they'd fill it up, and we'd all run down there with our jugs in our buckets and stuff to fill it up. But they had put that there as a temporary measure because they were digging the lines under the channel for water to come from the mainland. So we lived with that for about, I don't know, how many years?
Well, I know when I was in middle school, well, in our school before we had to walk the island to high school, we used to have basketball games, and we would run to the water fountain to drink the water, but the kids from the other teams could not drink that water because it was out of the depth.
Wasn't there,
But we drank it.
back of Jake and Helen Garrett's place on Brumley,
Uh-huh.
there was a stone thing, and she said something about that used to be part of the water.
That was probably some of the system that Gail Gordon Munsell had put in.
Because it was back in the back of their property on the dune, and it had a stone bottom on it. I think she said that at some point used to be part of a water house or something.
But once we got actual water,
Lines, yeah.
then there was development
Yeah.
started.
That ruins it every time. We bring the water into a place.
Like when they put the water up Isle Road, that was it, yeah.
But it was, I think, a lot of that can be, that part of that water system can be credited to George Hahn and the water board that was,
Yeah, it was established.
My brother Jed tells me a story of how Cedar Hill became the hill there. So maybe you know something about this. But he said that they got it in their heads, I guess this is the early 1900s, that they were going to raise sheep on the island. So they went and bought the sheep, and apparently coyotes were getting the sheep. So apparently this is a story my father had told us, and I don't remember what Jed done. And the men went in town, and they'd spread out all across the island and go down the island to shoot the coyotes, to try to kill the coyotes so that to save the sheep. So the sheep were going to be the big industry here, right? Well, it turns out the sheep stripped the grass of the land. It turned sandy, and that's why because there were cedar trees there, and the wind was blowing the sand out against the and that's why that hill formed. And, anyway, of course, then they had to get rid of all the sheep because they had to, going to town, so they got rid of the sheep. But that was the funnest place to play. Did y'all ever play in Secret Hill?
Across from the Venetian hot plate,
Yeah.
that's where we live, because we
Where
live in
the-
a big sand dune. But right across the street where the two bars are, I mean, there's two cafes. There used to be one of the tallest dunes. It was way high, and it was all hollowed out, because there was 4 or 5 trails that would come down it.
There were all kinds of trees.
Yeah, and we used to go up and get underneath the root and smoke. I got caught smoking in about 12.
What is your name?
It would be McGarry. My last name was Lonnie, or McGarry. And we used to, and they would take us, remember snipe hunting? We did that up on the thing. And the guys would build up and they'd give us these clubs and we'd hide in it. They would rope pine melons. We don't even find a pine melon.
We used to throw them on the road.
Yeah, and they would say, now, when you hear them come, you should, here we are, you know, out there just batting my melons. Yeah.
So one of our other favorite places to play was that slough. Remember the slough?
Oh, yeah, that's where we go, and we caught the sand fiddlers with it, and sold them for $2 cents a piece for sheep.
Yeah, we went fiddler, and that was
Yes.
a big enterprise in my family. And my
Right.
father built pens, large pens.
What was the business, describe that?
People use fiddlers for sheep head.
For bait.
And so, he would, my father made these big pens, and I have 5 brothers, so it's a big family. And he'd take us all out, and we'd go out, where all we went. We went, and we would go and scoop fiddlers up. They were so plentiful, we'd just throw them in the bucket, throw them in the bucket, throw them in the bucket. When we'd get home, count out our fiddlers into the little pens he made, and then we got paid. I don't remember
2
what.
for a penny, and he sold for 2 for a nickel.
Yeah.
Is that it? Something like that.
We
We
got-
got
we got
paid
two
so much, and then he sold them from his pens, but we did that for years.
Yeah, and you'd take out your lights, and they come to the light.
Yeah, and then when they were super plentiful like that, where you could crowd them into a corner and then scoop them, then you might have to go and
Dig.
get a shovel in there.
That slough was slimy
Oh, we
and
didn't really fiddle
icky.
it.
I know, but we played on it all the time, and I would never let my kids do it.
Oh.
Call up the slough, it said it's fully empty.
Well, my brothers,
Where
my
it's
brother,
harbors now.
Came in
Yeah.
through there,
Yeah.
and
when my brother,
That used to be
I'm
the
younger,
slough.
when my brothers
I know, we just
were
put
little,
our
they
pies
used
in
to
the
play.
ground, we said, sorry, because I had this perfect view.
The
So they said,
slough.
no,
The
sir.
slough was
It's the
clean,
harbor end.
when my brothers were little, the slough was clean, they had to put that bridge across there.
Oh, that's
And-
right.
And so,
Yeah.
but they needed a better, I guess they had a little bridge across there, and then.
It was the road.
No, first they had a little bridge, and then when they put the road in, they put these culverts
Yeah, right.
to go through for the slough.
drain.
But what happened, they built them too high. So when the water wasn't going through, there weren't getting that much fresh water, so the water got all stale and stagnant. My brother Jed used to build piers and rafts and boats, and we'd play out on that slough, and it got worse and worse as years go on. And then, they finally built, of course, once they put Till Harbor, that was it. They built it.
No, they did.
Yeah,
Well, one good place to go fiddling, as we used to call it, fiddlerly, was out there kind of where Woody's Boat Basin is right now, and where Tarpon Street, the restaurant is, and that was all just a tide plane in there. And when the tide was down at a certain time of day or evening, then the fiddlers were out. And one way to attract the fiddlers was the same way you go floundering with a lantern. Set it down there, and the fiddlers would come out, and then you pick them up. And only 2 or 3 of them stick to your fingers if you're getting right.
you can do that. Well, see, you go fast, and then
Because downtown, I can remember when it started at the Coast Guard, there was a restaurant there, and then it come on around, the boardwalk, and there was another fish place, and then another restaurant, and then there was Louis Belcher's Fish House, and then it went on around to Matthews.
We refer to that whole area as the flats,
Yes,
and that's where you
and,
got the fiddlers.
and when you would go through the fish house, you come out to where the boat ramps were. I remember just rows and rows of boat ramps.
Well, see, I'm so much younger than y'all.
You remember Quarter Range's water when you couldn't stand to carpets, and my dad got sick about 1941 or 42, and spent 2 weeks over there, and so we stayed at a relative's house while we were there. And we just nearly died because we couldn't stand that Corpus Christi water. We had to come home to
Water.
That's all it takes.
I don't remember anything about the water. I remember Daddy getting a drink out of a wooden tub.
Catching rainwater.
So I don't remember I don't remember having a telephone. And I know we didn't have TV because I went to the Mary Matthews to watch A Wonderful World of Color. I remember when it first came, Walt Disney, because we didn't have much. So I don't remember where our water came from.
But I was going to say is, was Carla in 64?
63, 61.
61,
whatever.
okay. So I was about 10 years old. Up to that time, do you remember, we were the first band.
Our mothers and sisters.
We were the first band. I can remember going down to the ferry and we played Hail to the Chief as Conley came over. He was in a white Continental convertible, and his white hair, and we were playing. Oh, that was a lot of fun. But and that was before. Was it? I think it was because the government guys. You always heard.
I wasn't on the island. I was already went home.
Not Carl. That was
I'll tell you that.
You know how they said, treaties or agreements were made with smoke-filled rooms? Well, these were the smoke-filled rooms. They had was it the Red Dragon or something like that? Then they had White Marlin. But when the federales would come over, somebody on the ferry would call, and then they would call the other joints in town. Because a lot of most of them were Democrats. They'd come here and they'd stay at like at Tarpon Inn, and then they'd walk down to Cox's or Run and God, whatever you call it. Yeah. And those were all gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were all gambling joints. Well, Carla came through, and I mean just flattened the flats. I don't think there was anything standing after that. But I was about 10 years old, and me and about 3 or 4 others, we went down there. Of course, some others didn't know we were doing this. We did a lot of stuff on that kid, though. But we went through, one of the places was Wilson's. I can remember Wilson's really good. It had just flattened like that. It was a two-story, and it was flattened like that. And we were going through, there was shingles and all this kind of stuff. And then, whoa! Oh, there was cards everywhere. But man, we found a roulette wheel. Whoa! Oh, we hit the jackpot. We took that home. But going through those things, we'd find, and the first piggy perch contest. I was in the first piggy perch contest. They got me and Toots Carlos Moore and B.K. Littleton, and they were really trying to promote this for the Deep Sea Roundup. And they had us down, they were taking pictures of us on the bar, and then we had a little meeting at Cox's, and we had this little meeting, and I look back at it today, and we were around a Greenfield craps table, so we had our first meeting.
One thing fun was my brother Jed, when he was in the 7th and 8th grade, he tells about how he used to go to school in the morning. Well, he would go hunting in the morning, he and his friend, and never wear shoes. Of course, we didn't wear shoes to school until I was in 4th grade, and all of a sudden they told